Welcome to this new video. After previously showing you Anne Frank's house and the Westerbork transit camp, which was the place where the Frank family and many other Dutch Jews passed through during the Holocaust, today we have moved to Italy in order to continue our journey into the history of the Holocaust.
When we talk about Jews, Holocaust, Shoah, the thought usually goes immediately to Nazi Germany and Hitler. In reality, Italy also has blood on its hands, and today, January 27th, we are here in the city of Trieste precisely to show you this as a reminder. This is the only real concentration and extermination camp that exists in Italy. We are in Trieste, and this is the Risiera di San Sabba. In fact, there was a crematorium here for the elimination of Jews, partisans and political prisoners. About 5,000 innocent people died here. Before we start, we want to ask for your simple support. During 2022, we received over 4 million views here on the channel, but only almost 14,000 of you have subscribed. Subscribe to the channel here so you don't miss future Holocaust-themed content, but not only that.
After the armistice of September 8, 1943, Venezia Giulia de facto ceased to be part of the Italian state, and Hitler formalized the creation of the Adriatic Littoral Operation Zone. Placed under direct German administration, the institution of the Adriatic Littoral included the provinces of Udine, Trieste, Gorizia, Pula, Fiume, and Ljubljana, and sanctioned the de facto annexation to Germany of a vast network. The presence of a strong resistance in the Venezia Giulia area, which arose from the Slovenian and Croatian side since the time of the Nazi-fascist aggression against Yugoslavia, to which the Italian resistance was added, constituted a major problem for the Nazis. Furthermore, from a strategic point of view, the area was vulnerable to a possible Allied landing near the southern border of the Reich. On October 1, 1943, High Commissioner Reiner assumed political and administrative powers.
Before the Second World War, there were approximately 5,000 Jewish people here in the city of Trieste who, however, following the racial laws of 1938 and the establishment of 4 centers in Italy to deal with the so-called Jewish problem, tried to flee abroad. Unfortunately, however, about 700 Jewish people were sent to extermination camps.
Of these, only about 20 survived and returned home. The death of 28 Jews inside the camp has been confirmed.
Built in the year 1898, this was specifically intended for rice husking as part of a series of complexes here in the San Sabba district, intended for that very purpose. Initially, this facility was utilized by the Nazis as a temporary prison camp specifically for Italian soldiers who had been captured after the date of September 8th in the year 1943. From October of 1943 onward, however, the Risiera di San Sabba was transformed into a concentration camp that was used for the imprisonment of Jews, partisans, as well as political prisoners. Some of these individuals were sorted and subsequently sent on to Germany and Poland, but a large number of people also remained here at this location, where tragically they ultimately lost their lives.
We are in Trieste, where our mini-series on the Holocaust continues. Today, January 27th, we've decided to honor Remembrance Day right here, from the Risiera di San Sabba, to not forget the 6 million Jews who died, and to give an even greater voice to those who, like Anne Frank, managed to live beyond death. Passing through the corridor, you reach the second courtyard where the actual camp begins. We are in the death cell. Prisoners brought from jails or captured in roundups were crammed inside this place, destined to be killed and cremated just a few hours later. It is also said that here, along with them, there were sometimes already corpses ready for cremation.
The people who were sentenced to death were in a cell we called the death cell, where they waited. It was a dark den. From here, one by one, they were taken through the courtyard.
In the four-story building, Jews and civilian and military prisoners destined for deportation to Germany were locked up in large dormitories. Men and women of all ages, and children, even just a few months old. From here, they were then transferred to Dachau, Auschwitz and Mauthausen toward a tragic fate that only a few were able to avoid.
This here is the Hall of Crosses. There were various workshops, tailor shops, and depots for collecting and sorting the goods and belongings that had belonged to the Jews who had been murdered. And after the liberation, a large mountain of eyeglasses was also found here. It concluded in the city of Trieste in April of the year 1976, 30 years later, the trial of those responsible for the crimes committed during the German occupation at the Risiera di San Sabba. At the trial, however, the defendants' bench remained completely empty because many of them had already been executed by the partisans, while several others had unfortunately died of natural causes. But the trial, in fact, reawakened a renewed and growing interest, as well as a deep sense of obligation to the enduring and lasting importance of memory here in Trieste as well, and especially here for Italy, at the Risiera di San Sabba. Regarding the type of executions used here at the Risiera di San Sabba, there are many hypotheses, and all are very likely well-founded. One of these methods was gassing by means of vehicles, specifically special vehicles that were designed and constructed for the Risiera di San Sabba. In these vehicles, innocent victims were placed inside the cargo bay, and through a tube connected directly to the exhaust gas, they were in fact killed. Another hypothesis, which is considered by many to be more than certain, is that these people were struck with a club. The club, which was used for this purpose, was even found, but it was later stolen after the liberation of the Risiera di San Sabba. The other hypothesis is that of execution by firing squad, which was clearly widespread just about everywhere in those times.
The blow from the club wasn't always enough to kill people, so the furnace also swallowed people who were still alive. To cover the screams of the executions, the noise of engines, the barking of incited dogs, or music were often used. The executions were carried out at night.
These you see right here behind me are actually the 17 microcells. As you can glimpse, there were approximately 2 beds in each of these small rooms, but they were often crammed with as many as 6 people, making the conditions extremely uncomfortable. The most dangerous individuals were locked up here, including political prisoners, Jews and partisans, all of whom were destined for execution within just a few weeks.
The doors and walls of the cells were covered with graffiti, which unfortunately are no longer visible today. The occupation of the facility by Allied troops, its subsequent transformation into a refugee camp for both Italians and foreigners, the humidity, dust and neglect have largely made the graffiti and writings disappear.
The first 2 of the 17 microcells, however, were intended for torture. Now let's go see them.
On the ground floor, when I arrived, we built cells that were for the most serious convicts, political prisoners, and people suspected of joining the resistance. There were people who were locked up here for months. This
was the only Italian concentration camp also intended for mass killing. In fact, unlike Fossoli, this one also had a crematorium oven. The crematorium oven once stood right here, in this very spot, where we now find this metal plate. We are standing directly in front of the cells that we just visited, which are known as the 17 microcells. In this area, the presence of the metal plate serves as a solemn reminder of that crematorium oven, which was later demolished and removed after the liberation. The outline of the crematorium is still visible on the building behind me, as we can see the distinct marks showing where the oven once stood. The system was underground. It was accessed by descending a staircase. An underground channel, its path clearly marked by the steel plate, connected the oven to the tall chimney. On the solid metal footprint of the chimney now stands a symbolic pieta made of 3 slender metal profiles, representing the swirling spiral of smoke that came out of the chimney.
Between 1943 and 45, it was the only concentration camp in Italy with a crematorium oven. From January to March 1944, the Nazis used the existing drying kiln, later turning it into a crematorium oven. This new structure was tested on April 4, 1944, with the cremation of 70 bodies that had been killed the day before by firing squad at the Opicina shooting range. The crematorium building and the chimney were destroyed with dynamite on the night between April 29th and 30th, 1945, by fleeing Nazis. Among the rubble, human bones and ashes were found, collected in 3 paper bags, the kind used for cement. The ashes that remained from the combustions, along with bone fragments, were periodically emptied into the Adriatic Sea.
Found. Bones, remains of human bones, it's clear. This, you see, is actually a piece of the cranium.
They're all blackened.
All blackened and white because they were burned, right? They're dry.
How often, for example, did the SS actually come to unload the bags?
They came about every day from Monday to Friday, from what I saw. Because when you heard the dogs barking very loudly outside, and you heard loud records on the radio, it meant that that night, you see, the oven was being operated.
What's striking is the silence, the echo of all the sounds, of the wind, of the seagulls that you can distinctly hear inside the Risiera. It's a very narrow and confined building even today, and this silence together with these amplified sounds makes everything feel even more spectral, almost otherworldly. Thanks to the important and generous donations received on January 27, 2002, the Risiera di San Sabba has now truly become a real museum, a place where a tangible and lasting image of what history was, along with its atrocities and tragic events, can be carefully preserved for future generations.
Our tour inside the Risiera di San Sabba ends here. In the next episodes, we'll talk again about the Holocaust, and we'll also talk again about Anne Frank, because we'll discuss the unsolved case of who betrayed Anne Frank.